Uh, a very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the first session of Fetal and Neonatal Neurology. And today we have an interesting session on neonatal neurology. I would request our President, Dr. Shifal Gurde ma'am, to introduce the topic for discussion today, the experts and the moderator for today's session. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah, thanks, Mahesh. So here we come with the next SIG, and it's neonatal and fetal neurology. Topic for today is something which is very controversial and debatable. The topic is moving the needle in low resource setting. Is hypothermia a friend or a foe in case of HIE setting? Speaker is a very dear colleague, Dr. Sudhin Thayal, who is a professor of perinatal neuroscience, director of Center of Pediatric Neuroscience, consultant neonatologist, Imperial Health Care, NHS Trust, Department of Brain Sciences, Imperial College London, who's alumni of AIMS New Delhi, and he has a lot of publications, and his research interest is prevention and disease stratification and neuroprotection in HIE. And he's received NIHR Clinician Scientist Fellowship in 2011, and he's got a grant exceeding 17 million pounds. He's conducted some of the largest studies in the world on HIE, including magnetic resonance biomarkers in neonatal encephalopathy, the MARBLE, the HELIX, and the PREVENT studies. I think we have the best possible speaker on this topic. Experts. We have experts with extreme amount of experience, and we have Dr. Bibek Talukdar, who is also the patron of this SIG, who was a former director, professor pediatrics, Maulana Azad Medical College, and associated Chacha Nehru Bal Chakitsalaya, New Delhi. And he was head of Department of Pediatrics, has been in charge of pediatric neurology, and has many research publications and a very accomplished career, and a wonderful teacher, and he has a book as well on pediatric neurology. Then we have the Dr. Siddharth Ramji, who was in the NNF. He's the past NNF president, National Neurology Forum of India, and he is the former dean and director, professor of pediatrics and neonatology, MAMC, New Delhi, for over 35 years of teaching and research experience, co-chair of technical advisory group of the Indian Newborn Action Plan, and many things. And he is somebody, I think, is the maximum amount of experience in the neonatology, and is expert of umpteen number of committees, and is a professional par excellence. And then we have Professor Lakshmi Nagarajan, who's Secretary, International Child Neurology Association, who's a child neurologist, epileptologist, Perth Children's Hospital, Australia. Thanks for joining, Lakshmi. I think it's you are going ahead of time with us, so it's later in the night for you. Thank you so much for joining. She's clinical lead, epilepsy and neurophysiology, and seizures, and and also the neonatology is something which she has focused her interest on. Then we have Professor Hasan Tekgul, who is heading the Turkish Pediatric Neurology Association, who's a pediatric neurologist and epileptologist consultant in the SIG Children Hospital, Izmir, Turkey, and who is very well accomplished and has many awards, and who has been a very dear friend for our Center of Excellence and AOCN webinar series. Thank you, Professor Hasan. And we have Dr. Sangeeta Terumule, who is joining first time with us as an expert from Malaysia. She is currently practicing in Thompson Hospital, Kota, Damansara, and she's received her neurology training from Hospital Kuala Lumpur, and she loves neonatal neurological emergencies and neonatal brain monitoring. Thank you so much, Dr. Sangeeta, for joining and to moderate this interesting session, because this talk will have discussions which I request you to put the queries in the Q&A, and then we will be having two interesting cases of neonatal neurology being presented by two people from across India. We'll be having only two cases. Dr. Gauri Pasi, who is my senior alumnus from AIMS New Delhi, and as head of Department of Pediatrics in charge of pediatric neurology in Choitram Hospital and Research Center. And she's a wonderful physician, and as I've told her, she's the most cerebral of the batch she was there in. So I think she's the best person to be moderating this session, which is supposed to be going to be very interesting. Over to you, Gauri.
Thank you, Shefali. I'm really excited to be here today to listen to Sudhin, who was a dear colleague in AIMS and we had a lot of exciting discussions then. And he went on to do his PhD in University of College of London and has been continuously doing meticulous and excellent research in the field of neonatal encephalopathy. I'm really excited to listen to him today. So he will be speaking on moving the needle in low resource settings. Is hypothermia a friend or foe? So then please take over.
Thank you, Cody, and thank you, Shefali, for the kind invitation and organizing this talk. It means you can see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
So that's the title of the talk. So what I'm going to cover is broadly 5 areas. We'll look at the current evidence on hypothermic neuroprotection and reasons why we did not find hypothermia to be neuroprotective in the HELIX trial, and then introduce this concept of compromised baby in the womb and talk something about the implementation and something about involving parent synthesis. So these are the broad 5 areas I'm going to cover over the next 30, 40 minutes. So this bit we already know, the burden of encephalopathy is huge. It's as big as COVID, 3.3 million babies affected worldwide, but it's been rather an invisible pandemic, partly because most of this burden occurs in LMICs, mainly in South Asia and Africa. So in the UK, we had around 1,000 babies with HI every year, that's all. And most of the initial cooling trials were done in high-income countries. The first trial was, so there have been 5 main trials conducted. 3 of them were recruited to completion and 2 were cut short before achieving the target. So the first one was a selective head cooling study, the CoolCap study, and all the others were whole body cooling trial. So of the main 3 cooling trials, which I'll say CoolCap trial led by Peter Gluckman and Alistair Gunn from New Zealand, the NICHT trial led by Professor Sita Shankaran from the US, and the TOBY trial by the Imperial College team published in 2009. And then the smaller trial, then a neuro study, which was cut short, just over 100 babies, and the ICE trial from Australian centers. And the pooled data from all these studies clearly shows there's a benefit to hypothermia. So if you look at the primary outcome of these trials, which are death or disability at 18 months, it's 49% in the cooled group as opposed to 63% in the usual care group. And since then, so since 2006-07, it's been standard of care in the UK and most of the high-income countries, so more than a decade now. Now, if you look at the evidence from LMICs, in fact, much more trials have been conducted in LMICs than high-income countries. Overall, 22 randomized controlled trials, including a total of 1979 babies have been recruited. And the pooled data shows a reduction in death or disability. That's the updated Cochrane review. And that's what we consider as the gold standard of evidence. But as always, the devil is in the detail. So if you look at these 22 trials, only 2 has been clinical trials. What I mean is the phase 3 trials. And one of them has been a selective head cooling trial. And other one was a whole body cooling trial. We can discuss in a bit more detail, the HELIX trial. And the 20 are single center studies, mainly pilot randomized controlled trials. I'm just going to briefly discuss these trials, not to have a go at them, but just to understand when we pool this data, what are the issues that might occur. So if you now look at the main phase 3 trial on selective head cooling, this was conducted in about 20 centers in China, published in 2010, and did create a lot of controversy issues at that time. Because the primary outcome of this trial was available only in 76% of the cases. And there was a lot of post-randomization exclusions. So this was the biggest, one of the biggest cooling trial ever done. And that was on selective head cooling. There is another trial which has been reported from a center in West Bengal. 60 babies randomized, half randomized to selective head cooling, and half to usual care, followed up at 30 months. Reporting a significant reduction in death or disability at 13 months. But I don't know if any of you have used selective head cooling. At Imperial, we have 12 intensive care cots. So it's not huge, but we have 16 neonatal consultants, about 40 junior doctors, and 100 plus nurses. So I often say we have a ratio of 10 to 1 to a baby, 10 clinicians or nurses to a baby, which my colleagues often don't appreciate. But even then, we did not have the resources to do selective head cooling because it's hugely resource intensive from a nursing point of view. So you need a special equipment. The cool cap, maintaining the temperature is very difficult. So this is something which has got no applicability in LMICs. Now, if you pull the data from all the whole body cooling trials, altogether there has been 13 trials, and then 13 of which 12 has been single center and 1 multi-center study. The pool data, of course, shows a benefit, although there's a significant heterogeneity when you pull the whole data. So the I-square overall effective heterogeneity, statistical heterogeneity is 95%, which is highly significant. Single center studies showing a substantial benefit, and multi-center studies showing a harm, which makes pooling quite difficult. It's not unusual for single center studies to show benefit often, and to overinflate the effect sizes, which is absolutely fine. But when you look at the single center studies, you see most of the studies has been recruited from one center primarily, which is again fine, but it just causes a bias because whether it's applicable to other centers, it becomes an issue about generalizability. So of the 7 sites participated in single center studies, 2 studies reported harm and all other studies have reported benefit. And in the multi-center study, in the Helix trial, we had 7 sites, and all of them actually none of them showed a benefit. Now, if you look at the 762 babies recruited from a single center, these are in 6 different trials showing benefit. There's another trial which is included in the meta-analysis, or 156 babies from single center completed recruitment in 16, and they reported 8-year outcomes in 2017. So that, like I said, it's not unusual for smaller single center studies to overinflate the treatment benefit. That's the way statistics work. And that's one of the key reasons why we need to look into more detail with the Helix trial. So I hope at least some of you have read the full paper of the Helix trial. It's actually almost like 10 papers compressed into one. It'll take at least a half afternoon to read the whole stuff. But essentially, this is a summary. 400 babies, 8 babies with moderate to severe HA recruited from 7 tertiary public sector neonatal units in India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. Half of them randomized to whole body cooling for 3 days and half to pneumothermia or to usual care. And the primary outcome was Bailey or death or moderate to severe disability at 18 months. And the follow-up rate was 97%. Primary outcome was death or disability, which occurred in 50% in hypothermia and 47% in the control arm, and no difference, no benefit at all with cooling. So it is a superiority trial showing no benefit of the intervention. But the mortality was higher in the cool group. So 42% mortality in the cool group and 31% in the control. So the number to harm is around 9 to 10. So every 9 or 10 babies you cool, 1 additional baby died. Before we discuss more detail, I just want to explain how we got to the Helix trial, how long it took to do the Helix trial. So we started around 2009 time, initially with some pilot studies using mainly phase change material, and then did more feasibility studies. So almost like 4 or 5 years of background work was done before the main trial started. And it took about 5.5 years to complete the main trial. And now the Helix children's study is going to start. So just to show you, so when we started off, so this is Professor Ramji in 2009 when we had in the initial discussions about the trial and so on. So you can see Professor Mehban Singh behind. And that's my daughter there in 2009. So we had this meeting in Delhi and Cochin. And then by the time we published the trial, my daughter was in medical school. So that's how long it takes to do a trial. It takes a lot of years and years to prepare, and then equally long time to complete it. And I just looking at this quote from Bill Gates, we often tend to overestimate what we can do in a year. Because when we started off, when I met Ramji for the first time at that time, I thought, okay, we'll just do a quick cooling trial using phase change material, and that'll be great. It'll be so beneficial to babies. But it actually takes much, much longer. So when we had the first analysis, when the statistician gave us the data from the Helix trial, so we had a shock, like you people as well. And mainly we went, so to see the end, I met with the IDMC, which was chaired by Professor Laptuk, who is one of the most respected neonatologists in the world, done a lot of cooling trials. And he's such a meticulous person. If you want to say Gauri Rao Pasi, he's going to take at least an hour. He talks so slowly, and equally, he's just so meticulous with the data. So he's a chair, and there's Professor Shabbar Jaffer who is head of UCL Institute of Child Health. They're absolutely robust in statisticians. And then and I asked them, why did you not stop this trial earlier if this mortality is higher? So the IDMC was looking at the data, masked the outcome, masked the allocation. So they didn't know they had group A and group B, but not like cooling or visual care. And when we look back at the data, so this is the Helix trial data split into blocks of 50 each. So you can see a benefit of cooling initially, when the first 50 newborns were recruited. And then as more and more babies were recruited, it's gradually changed. It shifted to more harm. And this is what often happens with clinical trials. So that's why we just need to be extremely careful about interim analysis and stopping trials early when you have efficacy or harm. But the IDMC was very clear that because the cooling was very established at that time, they did not want to unblind. They did not want to look at cooling separately. Now, retrospectively, that is a very, very good decision. Okay, so why did cooling not work? So I'm just going to talk about 5 things I can think why this would have been the case. You might be able to think more and just ask in the questions round if there is. So one issue is if you don't deliver the intervention correctly, it's not going to work. If your supportive care is inadequate, again, it won't work. Control group need to be appropriate, population inclusion criteria need to be appropriate, and the outcome assessment need to be correct. So these are the first reasons we are going to look at. What did Helix trial do? So if you look at the intervention, we used a servo control cooling device, which was actually much more advanced than the cooling devices used in the previous high-income country cooling trials. Not because we are more clever, it was just 20 years down the line, you had much better devices at the time of Helix trial. So the efficacy was very good. Within 15, 20 minutes of starting it, you could really get the temperature down. And all the trials, the data reported is based on the age at randomization, not age at reaching target temperature. And age at randomization was one of the highest, one of the earliest in the Helix trial. So 4.3 hours in the Helix trial, which is same as the NICHT NRN trial. And other trials were slightly later. So we went back and looked at this data from the NICHT cooling trial, which is not a published data. So only 53% did hit a temperature of less than 36 hours, 36 degree by 6 hours in the NICHT NRN cooling trial. And in the Helix trial was 72%, which I think is the highest among all the high-income country cooling trials. So that I don't think can really explain why cooling did not work. Now the setting. Now, you know this better than me. The healthcare in India and other LMICs is so diverse. It's like a pyramid. We have, some of the richest people living in India and some of the best hospitals in the world. So you go to the top blue pyramid as shown with the state-of-art private hospitals, who will have exactly same health status as any other, high-income country or even better. Below that, we have tertiary neonatal intensive care unit. There are a few, very good academic centers like AIMS, PJ, but then you have a big chunk of tertiary academic centers. Below that, again, there is medical college tertiary NICUs, and then we have district hospitals. And then much below is where a lot of HI occurs, but in the rural areas where good access to hospital healthcare is not just available. So we focused on the green area in this pyramid, not the blue one. and not the yellow one either. That's because the first trial was done by my colleague Nikki Robertson in Africa using water bottles to cool the babies, and she found 6 times higher mortality. So we got a bit worried because when the initial cooling trial came out, there was this view we could cool very easily. I mean, cooling is easy. It's about whether it's going to make a difference or not. So the mortality was 6 times higher. So we went one level up first in India. So this was a trial we did in Calicut Medical College using phase change material. Again, mortality was 2 times higher. So that's why in the main trial, we went to more tertiary academic and ICUs. So there's no point in going to the topmost part of pyramid then, because it will not be generalizable. So generally, all the units participating in the Helix trial were categorized as academic, tertiary and ICUs in those countries. And of course, the nursing care was never one-to-one, but they did have facilities for ventilation, usual cardiovascular monitoring and support, and so on. And the occurrence was around 5 to 10 per 1,000 live births. Now, I'll just show you this video, which shows one of the hospitals. This is the last baby recruited to the Helix trial. So you can see this baby is getting cooled now using a servo control cooling machine. And you can see some of the monitoring that baby is receiving and the intensity baby is receiving. So this was the last baby recruited to the trial. At that time, we had no idea. We are all excited to look at the results. But this is a family, which is probably very different to what we are.
Okay.
But this is the real India. And because the assessments were done during COVID time, we had to do the assessments at home and often in open space and so on. Now, the next issue is in the Helix trial, we had a lot of outbound babies. Then we thought, the transport system is not good. Is it because we had a lot of outbound babies? Is it why cooling did not work? So we then published this subgroup analysis separately looking at outbounds and inbounds. Of course, when you do clinical trials, you are not powered to look at the clinical outcomes using in subgroups, but you can do more MR biomarkers to pick up subtle defects. But anyway, so this is a survival plot you see. So if you look at the plots, the mortality was higher in both inbound and outbound who got cooled. The dotted lines in red are the outbound controls, so that they had the best outcomes. So, what the outbound babies were actually much sicker than less sicker than the inbound babies, contrary to what we thought. Which I think is because the sicker outbound babies may be dying before they get to hospital. So the ones who get hospitals are less sicker than inbound. So the mortality was higher in the inbound babies, and of course it was higher in inbound babies who got cooled. So the blue line indicates the cooled ones, and the red lines are the control babies. So you can see survival is better in the control one. And then we also looked at this particular biomarker called thalamic N-acetyl aspartate. Now, N-acetyl aspartate or NAA is a very interesting chemical. It's seen only in the neurons, and when the neurons get damaged, the level of NAA goes down. And that correlates very well with later neurological outcomes. And you can measure this using proton MR spectroscopy. So when we looked at the level of thalamic NAA, absolutely no difference. Now, the benefit of using NAA as a biomarker is that the standard deviations are very, very small. So with very small sample sizes, you can pick up a difference in the treatment. There was absolutely no benefit in neuroprotection, either in inbound or outbound. Then we thought, okay, is the inclusion criteria, because we'd used 5-minute TUPCA scores and 5-minute results rather than 10 minutes as in high-income country cooling trials. And we did not mandate the use of birth acidosis. So we looked at 2 different groups, a group who had the proper long birth depression with an UPCA score of, low UPCA score of 10 minutes, or birth acidosis, or the ones who had short depression. So roughly equal numbers, the 201 with long depression and 207 with short depression in the Helix trial. This has been again published as a subgroup of the main Helix trial just recently. there was absolutely no effect of hypothermia based on this inclusion criteria birth depression group. And then again, when we, so these are p-values, you're seeing none of them is anywhere near 0.05. And when we plot the survival plots, again, you can see the dotted lines. So the most survival occurred in short depression. So on the whole, short depression group had better outcomes than the long depression, which is understandable. But in both, the cooled ones had worse outcomes. So you can see the blue lines are always below the red lines. So whether it's short or long depression or acidosis, cooling made both worse. And again, when we looked at the thalamic and aspartate, no difference with no benefit with neuroprotection, either in long depression or short depression. Okay, then what about the control group? Now, when we get HIE, physiologically what happens is a drop in body temperature. That's a physiological response to hypoxic ischemic injury. So this is a study from Nikki Robertson's group. She did this in Africa. So when you don't put babies under radiant warmer, what you see is a drop in temperature. And the lower the drop, more likely you are to die. But when the cooling trials were published, this is 2 decades back, all these trials had much more hypothermia in the control arm, which was very, very surprising. So, Sita told me when they did not notice this when the trial was going on, it was picked up only when it was submitted for publication. One of the reviewers said, why is the control, temperature of a control baby so high? So 23% had high temperature in the control group. And same with other trials as well. And since then, when they did the secondary analysis, there was a clear association of hypothermia and adverse outcomes. So higher your temperature, more likely you are to die or to have disability. So now that leaves with the question, does hypothermia really work in high-income countries? And we'll never know the answer because we never had a normothermic control arm in high-income countries. A lot of babies had hypothermia. In the Helix trial, only 5% had hypothermia because we were kind of a Captain Hindsight. We knew hypothermia was going to cause more harm. So we deliberately put the temperature of the control group as well a bit low. Well, hypothermia happens by iatrogenic injury. I don't think babies themselves are going to have hypothermia, but it's when you put in 2 or 3 babies in the same cohort or put overuse radiant warmers, they get hypothermic. Now, the outcome assessments in all the main 3 trials were pretty similar. So all of them used Bailey scales. In the Helix trial, we used Bailey 3 because by that time, Bailey 2 was no longer available, and now it's Bailey 4. But again, all the assessments were done at 18 months. NICH-TNR and trial and the Helix trial used exactly same cutoffs like moderate and severe disability. CoolCap and 2B trial used severe disability. All of them had very good follow-up rates and masking assessment were done. And like I said, for every 10 baby cooled, 1 additional baby died, although 1 cerebral palsy got prevented. So sometimes people get confused, why does the benefit in cerebral palsy? Yes, that benefit is there because those babies are dying and not surviving to develop cerebral palsy later on. And if you compare, so why was the cooling not, so it was not any of these 5 factors. So what else is going on? So this table shows the key comparison of the main cooling trials. The Helix trial had 408 babies. It's the first column you can see. Then NICH-TNR trial, CoolCap, and TOBI trial. One of the initial hypotheses was there is more sepsis in LMIC, and that is why Helix trial cooling did not work. But we did not find that. At least the culture positive sepsis rates was same in all the trials. And there's always this issue about culture negative sepsis. But the proportion of phenicitis again was similar in Helix trial and other high-income country cooling trials. Helix trial had the lowest proportion of severe HA compared to other cooling trials, still the mortality was high. Now, the differences you see are shown here in the red. Birth weight is lower. Of course, the babies in South Asia are less heavier than high-income countries. But there was much more growth restriction as well. 20% were growth restricted. And like I said, fewer babies had hypothermia in the control arm. And seizures were occurring very early in the Helix trial. I'll come back to it a bit later. And more importantly, this acute sentinel events were reported only in 10%. But having said that, in Helix, almost 70% for outbound. outbound babies. So we never know, what was the quality of intrapartum monitoring, and it actually miss any sentinel events. And I'll come back to this discussion a bit later on. But at least the reported event rates, sentinel event rates was much lower, 10% in the Helix trial, 62% in the NICHG, and 674% in the TOBI trial. One of the other things we did was to do some mechanistic studies in the Helix trial. So what you're seeing here is gene expression. So gene expression has got nothing to do with your genes. It's how your genes make proteins. So if you take a bar of chocolate, immediately, gene expression genes will tell you make these proteins to make insulin and so on. So it's something that occurs very rapidly. So we looked at the gene expression of these babies in the Helix trial, and then compared that with high-income country babies with HA from high-income countries as well. So in gene expression, you need to do next generation sequencing of all the genes. So each line, each horizontal line, you can see the green and red line is a gene. So you're talking about, thousands and thousands, tens and thousands of genes, and each column is a baby. And then some patterns start emerging when you have brain injury, when you have sepsis, and so on. So we started looking this into more detail, and this has been just published recently. So what we found was that in high-income countries, it's mainly acute hypoxia inducible factors which are affected, as opposed to the intermittent pathways with aldosterone signaling in LMICs. So aldosterone signaling is something that is often affected non-static sleep apnea, where you have intermittent hypoxia. So that is the kind of pattern we saw in the Helix trial babies. And again, this is quite interesting. Why there should be intermittent hypoxia without an acute sentinel event in LMICs. So following on from that, we did this, just completed this large study called PREVENT in several hospitals in South India, not the Helix centers. We went, all these are again tertiary medical colleges, but slightly less level of care. And the occurrence of HA was 12 per 1,000 live births, again, huge, burden. And all of them were tertiary medical college, Calicut Medical College, Bangalore Medical College, and Karnataka Medical College. Just under 80,000 women were studied. So we studied very carefully the intrapartum monitoring to understand what is happening during labor. And that's what we did in the study. Surprisingly, I know this writing slide is very small, but I'll just highlight the key findings here. Almost 77% of the women were getting admitted to the labor room even before the onset of active labor. When you say active labor, cervical dilation more than 5, they are all in the hospital. Because initially we thought HI is high because women are getting hospital late in obstetric labor and so on. No, they're actually coming to hospital quite early. And if you look at the occurrence of cesarean sections, let's see that 44% cesarean. So it's really a huge, massive proportion of cesarean, but still they're getting so much of HI. And if you look at the intrapartum sentinel events, only 4% had acute. So this data we are absolutely certain about. They are having very low occurrence of acute sentinel events, which is again very, very surprising. And when we looked at the mortality in this population, it was very similar to Helix trial. In fact, a bit higher than the Helix trial. The mortality in the moderate was 26% in the Helix trial and 40% in the PREVENT, which is such a huge, cohort of 2,000 babies involved. And even babies with mild HI were dying. And then in the PREVENT study, we also introduced a care bundle. So it was an interrupted time series study. The first part, we just collected the baseline data to look at the occurrence of HI. And then we introduced a care bundle to see if we can prevent HI from happening. So the care bundle we used was very simple. It's like an augmented lecture program. So we use birth companions, but we trained them, to using videos and think, how can you actually support the women during labor? So that is one of the interventions. So instead of using CTG machines, which may or may not work in those settings or may not get interpreted correctly, we use graphic Dopplers. So graphic Dopplers is a handheld machine. So instead of having just your heartbeat, you can see a trace of the heartbeat and use that as an intermittent fetal monitoring. The third thing we did was to use an electronic partogram. So partogram, as you might remember, it's a record of labor progression in labor progression. You plot the cervical dilatation, how the mother is doing, fetus is doing, and so on during active labor. Often people do it after baby is born, which doesn't serve the purpose. So we developed an electronic partogram using a tablet computer so that people have to do it in real time. And then we used control nomothermia as the fourth element of the care bundle. So so avoiding hypothermia and avoiding hypothermia. So these are the four elements combined into one, which is called a care bundle. And when we introduced this care bundle, a substantial drop in HIE was noted. This work is not completed yet, published yet, but will be published very soon. We also looked at the seizures. In the Helix trial, we did not have EEG monitoring. So we thought, are people overcalling seizures? Is that why we had a lot of seizures in the Helix trial? And why is it occurring so early? So in the PREVENT study, we did continuous EEG monitoring very earlier on. And many of these babies having seizure onset quite early, very soon after birth. On full montage EEG, we were having seizures. Now, this is interesting because to have seizures, it's usually take around 6 to 8 hours from the initial injury. So this means our babies are having hypoxia much earlier on in the labor process. So this is a summary of some of the key findings. So like I said, sepsis rate were not too high, although this was against what we initially thought. And then the occurrence of low birth weight and growth restriction was much higher in Helix trial. Outcome of both long and short depression was poor. And this is another interesting finding. If you don't have heart rate at 5 minutes, or certainly 10 minutes, none of the babies made it. And this is again very much in contrast with Heineken country data, where even if you don't have heart rate at 10 minutes, almost 20-25% have completely normal outcome. So these babies don't have much of reserves to tolerate even shorter periods of hypoxia. And like I said, intrapartum events were rare, seizure onset is early, gene expression is suggesting intermittent hypoxia, and MR imaging, I not shown that, but it is showing much more white matter injury, but not established injury, and hypothermia did not work. So putting all this together, now if you go back to why does hypothermia work in HIE, and this is one of the original studies reported from University College London many years back. This is a piglet model of hypoxic ischemic brain injury. You can see a newborn piglet there. So what you do is that you intubate the piglet and then clamp the carotids with a remote clamp to induce a transient hypoxic ischemic injury, and then release it. You do this while keeping the piglet inside an MRI scan and continuously measure the energy metabolism. So when you induce the hypoxic injury, you can see the energy levels dropping, plummeting down, and that it improves only to go down a bit later, which is called a secondary energy failure. And if you cool this piglet before that happens, you can prevent the secondary energy failure occurs. So this is how cooling started and the pilot studies and main trial started. Now, looking back, these are all very healthy male piglets. That's how they selected. And this hypoxic injury is acute, single acute injury. But this is probably not what we are seeing in LMIC settings. These babies are already compromised, growth restricted, bit of infection, and so on. And then there is no acute injury. The injury is much more intermittent. So when we produce intermittent injury, the pattern of brain injury, intermittent hypoxia, the pattern of brain injury is very different. And in those settings, cooling actually does not work. And we think this is probably why hypothermia did not work in the setting. And another thing to note is that if you use oxytocin, this is a systematic review one of my fellows did publish last year or 2 years back. So when you give excess of oxytocin during labor, it actually increases the risk of HIE. Possibly it's causing more uterine contractions, and because this baby is already compromised, it cannot even withstand the normal uterine contractions. And if you give oxytocin on the top, it does make things worse. And this is often the case in public sector hospitals where clinicians are in a rush to get mothers out of the labor room. So oxytocin is used very frequently. So this is the hypothesis we're generating, the hypothesis of the compromised baby in the womb. So if you think about the acute intrapartum events, there is no reason why uterine rupture would not occur in LMIC, or would be any less than LMICs compared to developing countries. So that is occurring. So it's a group of acute hypoxia, and of course there's a group of hypoxia plus infection, and there are some HI mimics, rare metabolic stuff, and so on. But the vast majority of the babies, we think, are having this non-acute hypoxia from intermittent intrapartum hypoxia, and that is we're calling this as compromised baby in the womb. And in those babies, cooling is not going to work. And that's probably related to the socioeconomic deprivation, undernutrition, and so on. Now, what do we do about that? Cooling does not work. Now, de-implementation is never easy once the practice is established. So there are 4 R's of de-implementation. We'll discuss a bit more later. So restriction, reduction, replacement, and removal. The same issue happened in adult cardiac arrest. So this was the first paper published in 2002 showing benefits of cooling following adult cardiac arrest. And then cooling became standard of care in adults and children with cardiac arrest. Almost 2 decades later, the large TTM trial, targeted temperature management trial from Europe, was published, showing no benefits of cooling whatsoever. And so they have this annual conference in Europe every year. They invited me to talk about Helix trial, and I was talking about the the issues the Helix trial had generated. It was nothing compared to what they had after the fallout they had after the TTM2 trials was published. So in the meeting, I was so glad that this meeting was in Europe rather than in the US, because Europe has got strict gun laws. People was just so angry. Not the people who did the original trial. So Stephen Bernard was there in the meeting, and he was absolutely relaxed about that. This is how evidence goes. But the industry had put in a lot of investment into developing different cooling devices, using tablets, nasal cooling tablets, and so on. So there's a lot of acrimony. But everybody changed the practice in Europe. Now nobody will cool following adult or pediatric cardiac arrest. Now, one of the issues in babies is that why cooling it's going to be so difficult to de-implement or reverse is this issue, is that babies will not come out with the label saying, I got moderate HI, I got severe HI. It's a continuum from birth acidosis to mild HI and moderate HI. So only 10% of the babies with a low birth acidosis or a low pH of less than 7 are going to have HI. And depending upon how rigorously you classify, your mortality can go anything between 0% to 100%. So that is one of the challenges in the therapeutic drift. And the issue, depending upon the criteria you use, so assuming cooling increases your death mortality by 30%, if you use a liberal criteria for cooling, say, for example, your baseline mortality is 10%, and if you cool 10 babies, 1 baby die. But you won't see that because it's only 13%. So 30% of 10 just increasing to 30% mortality. So you'll not see that increase in mortality. So you might actually think cooling is beneficial, and then we'll use more and more cooling. On the other hand, if we use a strict criteria for defining moderate and severe HI, you'll have higher baseline mortality. And then when you cool these babies, your mortality is now going up to 65%, 30% increase. Then that mortality increase become visible to clinicians. And then you think, oh, okay, this is probably not beneficial, maybe it's harmful. And then you start less and less cooling. And this is exactly what I know your guidelines chaired by Professor Ramji suggested. This is a brilliant idea with the NNF cooling guidelines, which says that you should cool only if the admission temperature, all these 5 criteria need to be present. Baby should be term, 36 week or near term, less than 6 hours, and then with a normal admission temperature. This is going to be very tricky because the natural response to hypoxia is hypothermia, like I said. And if you are keeping radiant warmers in labor room, you should be very careful not to overheat the baby. And then birth acidosis is mandatory. UPGAR scores at less than 4 or equal to 4 at 10 minutes is mandatory. Acute perinatal sentinel event is mandatory, and evidence of moderate or severe HI. Now, if you use this criteria, you will see at least 40% mortality, and then you'll come on to starting restricted use of cooling. So if you look at some of the recent studies published, so this is a study which is published from KEM Mumbai, Ruchi Nanavati's group there. So 211 babies were cooled. Acute events occurred in 5%. 5-minute upcast score, the median was 5 with IQR of 6 to 8. So nobody actually had, 4 or less, even at 5 minutes. So 10-minute upcast score is not reported. And the mortality at discharge was 15%. So none of these babies would have met the NNF criteria for cooling. So, once you implement the NNF criteria, you can say quickly the number of babies who are cool will go down. Again, this is some data from the Neonatal Collaborative, which involved 17 tertiary NICUs in India. Only 22% had acidosis. They had not even reported, 10-minute upcast scores and perinatal central events. And I suspect hardly any of these babies would have met the NNF criteria. Mortality was 18% in this group. Now, there's also considerable variation in the Neonatal Collaborative. So of the 17 centers who participated in data collection, most of the babies were recruited from one center. So, the practices do vary. There's a center-wise differences in practices even in India. Now, before I conclude, just a few final words about golden rules about my research. I've taken, I think, more than allocated time. Just quickly rush through now. So the first thing is, make sure whatever we do, we engage with parents. Make sure parents are always in the center of what we do as equal partners. And this is something one of the main funders in the UK insist on. This fund is called NIHR. And unless we have parents and public as co-applicant in the grant, and they are involved in developing the protocol, they'll not fund the research. So it's not about, we are not doing this for parents, we are doing it along with them. So nothing about us without us. That's the motto of this research. So I don't know if Professor Ramji would remember, when I met Professor Ramji for the first time in 2009 or 8 at MAMC. So he took me from his medical dean's office to the NICU, short walk. And it took almost an hour to get there, because every 5 minutes, somebody would stop him and ask something, where is his toilet, or where's the direction to this place, and so on. And every time he would just stop and explain patiently. And I asked him at that time, I was quite fresh, and how can you do your job if you're spending so much of time? And then he said, this is actually my job. Our job is, we are there for patients. And not the other way around. So make sure whatever you do, parents and babies are in the center. The second is about research capacity building in LMICs, which is absolutely vital. So it's just removing the hierarchy. It's not just about doctors. Doctors cannot do this alone. So involving nurses, other professionals, social scientists, midwives, trial managers, and removing the hierarchy. So we often have this 1 week away days, or in some nice place. So initially, one was in Ooty, another was in Goa. So a lot of senior and junior academic people, researchers sit together and discuss and brainstorm over a week ideas and try to inspire the new generation. And many of them are not medical in this group. So you can see Professor Sida Shankaran there, and then a couple of other professors from US and the UK. And the last thing is that make sure we do take very properly informed consent. This is a systematic review we did some time back. If you look at the consent rate for drug trials, it's shocking. It's nearly 100% especially from India. That raises a lot of issues about what are we actually telling these parents. So every time we do we do a lot of training on consenting. In Helix trial, we video record all the consent. At the moment, we are doing another drug trial. Again, we do video record this consent, and then we audit this consent and give feedback to continuously improve it. So in summary, we think a change is happening because of intermittent hypoxia, either due to normal labor contractions or augmented labor, rather than acute events. And that concept, I'm calling this as a compromised baby in the womb who will not respond to hypothermic neuroprotection. And if you adhere to NNF guidelines, that will minimize harm. And of course, all the discussions I've made now, it's about the vast majority of the population in there. It does not apply to private hospitals or the upper middle income countries who may have the same health status as high income countries. But the way forward is to develop a rapid disease stratification so that we can understand what is the underlying mechanism of the brain injury, and we can give personalized neuroprotective therapy. And the way to go is with doing large platform trials instead of testing one drug at a time. So thank you for listening. So finally, this is the new venture we are developing, a collaborative neuroprotection trial platform where we can test multiple drugs in the same platform, and this is in collaboration with PGI and Imperial College London. Thank you.
Thank you, Sudhin. Time just stopped. This was such an amazing talk, and I really appreciated it. I just forgot time listening to you. It was so good. The thing I really appreciate about your talk was that you maintained your idealism throughout all these years, and you have not got into some ivory tower research. You are grounded. You know what is going on in India, in a little small tiny hospital. So that was really amazing. The other thing I appreciate about you is that you had the courage to go against international and national opinion very clearly. It takes guts to do this. Most of the neonatologists are furious with you, especially those who work in tertiary care centers. But I really enjoyed your talk, and I'm opening the talk for questions. I invite the experts who are here to please chip in with their comments, and then I'll discuss the questions.
Professor Ramji first, I think, sir.
Thank you. Well, I think Sudhin summarized this well. Sudhin will remember that when we first initiated the discussion, I told him quite categorically that I don't think hypothermia will work in our babies. And there's a reason for that. Even before cooling came in a big way, we had already started noticing that a lot of kids would develop significant encephalopathy without even having too much of sentinel events or even too much of resuscitation. We had seen babies who never were resuscitated at birth, but very rapidly developed encephalopathy. And we were quite clear by that time that a lot more is happening antepartum to these babies. The environment is already hypoxic. Labor is not only adds injury, but there is a chronic process that's running. And actually what the HELIX trial showed was these kids have already suffered subacute injury by the time an acute onset kind of adds on. So it's not surprising that we didn't see. In fact, when the results for HELIX came, Sudhin was very surprised, but I told him I'm not surprised because that was my gut feeling, and I had reasons for that. So I think the point is well taken, and that's one of the reasons why at NNF we had to bring in a position statement, because we were deeply concerned with the way a flippant attitude with which hypothermia is being applied anywhere and everywhere. And I felt that it was time that we put caution, so people realize that everything that you see in the West can't be imported. Your populations have differences. Of course, I'm sure there are. I think, as he said, we need to identify and stratify the group of babies who actually may benefit from hypothermia. So I think that's an exercise that we need to do. We haven't found the answer, but we do know that the events that unfold are different. In fact, let me share that we have another large cohort of pregnant women, the Garbhini cohort, which is looking at preterm births. But we found very interesting data which shares a lot of commonality with what happens to babies who develop asphyxia and HIE. So which means that there is something happening to these women early, and these fetuses are not growing, being exposed to the most optimum environment. I think there are issues beyond just acute events. I think there are issues with micronutrients. We have some interesting data on micronutrients emerging on what it may do to preterm labor. And we believe that some of them may also operate in some other pathways that lead to subacute brain injury. So I think it is important for us to recognize that there's a substantial population of our women who are at risk because of a variety of factors. And so just providing hypothermia as a management after birth is not going to be enough. But having said that, I think there are still a reasonable number of women who have reasonable optimum opportunities for letting the fetuses grow. And when events like HI happen there, I think there is a reasonable chance that they may behave like what we see in the high-income countries. So I think for India, it's important that we still concentrate on looking at our mothers in the antenatal period. And then I think we need to really now work on identifying a subgroup of mothers and infants where hypothermia can actually be utilized and where we can see beneficial results. So even if you look at the HELIX trial, there's a trend. Of course, these are all very secondary exploratory outcomes that among the cooled babies, there's a trend that the neurodevelopment outcomes were slightly lower. So maybe we need to study a little more and identify the subgroup who actually benefit. So I think that's where we stand. So I think hypothermia is not really a panacea at the moment. I think there are more fundamental things that we need to take care of. And I don't think without that, I mean, as he said, mortality is going to go up because these children are very, very sick, and hypothermia itself carries far more intensive monitoring and risks of some of these events, tilting the baby towards mortality because the complications go up are higher. So I think that's where we stand. And I think what Sudhin summarized was brilliant, because I think he just summarized all that's available to tell us that these babies are not what has happened, as you see in the West. And I think the HELIX trial in the end actually just simply gave confirmation to the gut feelings that a lot of us neonatologists in India in those days felt about it. At least I felt very strongly that it may not work. So I think, but I think we have some work to do in at least helping and trying to find out who are the ones who actually benefit. So there is still, it's not a closed door situation. I think the next step for India is to try and stratify and identify babies who actually benefit. We know who doesn't benefit. I think it's now important for us to find out who probably benefit. The numbers may be small, but let's give them the best chance of survival, at least for those who can benefit from that.
Then I have two quick questions before I go on to the chatbot questions. One was, is there some role of erythropoietin if cooling doesn't work? And second is that you did the spectroscopy in the thalamic region, and NA, you looked at NA in the thalamus, whereas most of our babies have these intermittent low hypoxia. So we tend to have more white matter injury or watershed infarct. So would it have been better to look at the MRS in the white matter rather than the thalamus? That was one question. Two questions.
Yeah, thanks, Gauri. Shafali, you're recording, isn't it? I need to, I need to listen to Gauri's words when I feel down. She always boosts people up, always charming. Let me, so we're doing a trial on erythropoietin. I don't know if Professor Joseph Matthews joined. He's in the IDMC.
He has joined. He has made some comments.
But he's not going to talk to me about erythropoietin, but the trial is now ongoing now. We did an external pilot of the Embrace trial, that's the erythropoietin trial, which we had just submitted for publication. It's just 50 cases. Let me quickly share my screen. So we use, if you give erythropoietin late in the HEAL trial, it doesn't work. If you give it 24 hours of age, it's not going to work. But if you give it very early, and give it for longer duration, there is a possibility. I'll just show you the survival plot. So, the erythropoietin one is in blue and the control arm is in red. And this difference, even with that 50 babies, was statistically significant. There's just a pilot study, but the main trial we're planning to do just over 500 babies from different centers, 8 or 9 different centers in South Asia. So it's going to take another year and a half to complete, but it's certainly very promising. Erythropoietin, we should not dump it. Now, with white matter, yes. The issue with white matter is that it's very difficult to get homogeneity there. It's very difficult to, we're collecting that data as well, but the line weights for spectroscopy are much more wider. So it's very difficult to quantify. But yes, yeah, white matter injury, white matter would be a good place to do spectroscopy.
There are a lot of complimentary comments in the chat box.
Gauri, Lakshmi has to say something. Lakshmi, please. Dr. Lakshmi from
if
Australia.
you have time, thank you very much. It was wonderful to hear you speak on the trial. I've spoken about it in different talks on neonatal seizures, and I've defended saying that it's one of the best studies that's been undertaken and that it's a very well conducted RCT. But it was good to have you actually outline it and give this talk. One of the questions I wanted to ask you is, see, most of the patients and the mothers and the babies in the Helix trial are South Asian origin. Was there any subgroup analysis from the trials done in the high-income countries? Was there a difference depending on the ancestry?
It's such a, it's $1 million question. It's such an important thing. We never looked into it until the COVID came and hit. So in the COVID, the people from lower, ethnic minorities in the UK, which will be us, people like us, and blacks, they had much better outcomes. And that's now, it's increasingly, a lot of diseases, different ethnicities do, I don't know if it's ethnicity or it's more related to socioeconomic deprivation. That certainly is there, but it's never been really looked at because the numbers has been so small. But increasingly, certainly in the UK, that's a huge area of interest to look at that issues. In the UK, the mortality of Black and Asian population, just the mortality, neonatal mortality is 4 times higher than the white population.
Gauri, can we have comments from the experts before we take the Q&A, rest of them, because then they will not be able to speak. Dr. Lakshmi, your experience in your center?
Oh, we cool all moderate to severe HIE babies. And New Zealand is one of the early proponents of the therapeutic hypothermia. And some of the animal work was done from there as well. So it was in New Zealand that, was it last year? Yeah, that I was speaking and saying we have to rethink about therapeutic hypothermia. And there was a lot of discussion about it. And after that meeting and that talk, I actually read all the questions regarding this trial and the answers to that in the different papers. And I still think that we have to reconsider who we cool, especially in low and middle income countries. And maybe cooling is not that great an option for some places.
Mr. Hassan from Turkey has to say.
It's a nice talk by Dr. Sudhin. Nice comments by Dr. Ramji and also the other speakers. I came across recently 1 or 2 studies who said where their observation is that those babies who were cooled, the incidence of cerebral palsy was less.
True. Incidence of cerebral palsy in Africa from prematurity is very low. Just because
studies are not
24 weeks don't survive. If you cool, if the sickest babies with severe HI are dying when you cool, of course, they will not go on to develop cerebral palsy. So there is an inverse relation of mortality and cerebral palsy. So every 10 babies you cool, one additional baby die, but there is an extra, baby with cerebral palsy saved.
Another small question. Most of the I'm not a neonatologist. From our observation, from what we see around in the literature, most of the cases, studies, the number of cases are not very good, mostly 10, 30, 50, 40. And many babies will have quite a lot of variables. Gestation may be very, very different. Weights may be very, very different. By the time cooling is started, they already had a lot of complications. One may be having an atelectasis, another may be having a sepsis. So will these be confounders? Will they reflect in the outcome?
Of course, it will, yeah. But then, you're starting cooling very early on. Within 6 hours, you need to start. And then, yeah, I mean, all
In
those.
6 hours also, we have seen cases developing atelectasis.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Similarly, the control group, do they have also to be taken up these issues so far weight is concerned, gestation is concerned, any complication is concerned? Their response to cooling away very, very low birth weight, say 1 kg, another baby 2, 3 kg, there may be their response, their body's mechanism may be different, response may be different. Does this strength need to be considered? Similarly, even in the control groups also, some of the factors.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, say, there is a trial which is done on borderline premature babies in the US. So Sita Shankaran was one of the co-authors. It will be published very soon. They actually found the same thing, cooling was causing more harm. So the thing is because, you don't probably have much of fat, and also mechanisms may be different. You are not able to tolerate the hypothermia much. But what I'm just going back to what Professor Ramji said, now we got data from the PREVENT study on about, we have MRI scans about 200 babies, and you're just looking at this is exactly what we're seeing there. You're not too bad at birth, needing a lot of resuscitation, but developing encephalopathy later on, a lot of MRI changes. Yeah.
Yeah, let's see.
There's a question from Dr. Hassan.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Gori. Dr. Sadin, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. I really enjoyed your positional paper on the therapeutic hypothermia. I really enjoyed your 3 statements. First one is that we have to use the restricted criteria for therapeutic hypothermia based on the NIH criteria. I really enjoyed that. Before that, we used different steps, criteria. It's not clear. The second one, you clearly mentioned that gene expressions suggest the subacute intermittent hypoxic attacks still continue. And then finally, we have to be separate our study group based on the acute hypoxic ischemic injury plus intermittent hypoxic injury. We have to define clear biomarkers, neurophysiological, biogenetic, and electrophysiological criteria for the define which babies are suitable for the therapeutic hypothermia. Based on the recent development on the neuroimaging studies in the future, I believe we are going to use neonatal connectome studies based on the therapeutic interventions babies. I mean, EEG connectivity is important, and then the MRI connectivity is also important. So we have to be clearly defined which case single acute hypoxic ischemic injury, which case just only intermittent hypoxic injury, and then a plus group. My question about that, what kind of gene expressions suggest that intermittent hypoxic injury occurred? I mean, the mitochondrial genes or mRNAi, microRNAi, or epigenomic things, or just what kind of genes are important? Mitochondrial or mRNAi release?
No, we look at the whole genome.
Whole genome.
Yeah, the whole genome one. The issue, and it's at very early stage now because you have, it's like picking a needle from the haystack at the stage. You've got 10,000s of genes, and then you need to identify few ones which are up or down related. And then eventually you want to identify a couple of genes so that you can develop this into point of care test. So what you eventually want to do is to do it as a PCR so that it can be a bedside test. Next generation sequencing is going to take months. It's not going to be clinically useful unless it's a PCR-based thing, because you need to make a decision within few hours of birth. So that's when you need to have that point of care test.
Thank you. The final comments in my country, it is a mandatory based on the current guidelines. It is mandatory to apply therapeutic hypothermia to the babies who evolving to moderate to severe hypoxic ischemic brain injury. It is a medical issue. It's a malpractice issue. If the neonatologist doesn't give doesn't provide this opportunity to babies, we have a lot of issues about from the families. So it is a legal issue. I think it's a malpractice issue. So we strongly suggest the family to apply the therapeutic hypothermia based on the restricted criteria in my country.
Yeah, I mean that's an issue in the UK as well, because people worry if you don't cool within 6 hours and then baby has seizures, after 6 hours, even if it's mild HI, am I going to get sued? So we did some initial pilot studies on babies with mild HI. And what we found was that the occurrence of seizures is not going to get altered whether you cool or not. So we are about to start a big cooling trial on babies with mild HI, around 450 babies in the UK, which will give the definitive answer. But so following that, the national body in the UK, the British Association of Perinatal Medicine said, we should not be cooling babies with mild HI outside the context of a clinical trial. So at least in the UK, you have legal backing. If you don't cool, you are not going to get sued. But the situation in the US is very different. I completely understand. If you don't cool, the lawyers will come after you.
Thank you.
I'll just quickly go over a few questions in the chat box.
So Gauri, can I just respond to that issue about ethics? I think we need to understand that the medical practice ethics will vary with the response a treatment has in a given population or ethnic group or country. And it was for that very reason that the NNF actually issued that statement saying that you can't it cannot be standard of care in this country. It is still has to be treated as a trial, and there are very strict criteria. So this is a kind of what the professional body did as a safeguard to protect the physicians from saying that somebody just can't go to court and say, why was my child not given cooling? In fact, a time may come and say, they may turn around now and say that, why did you cool my baby and let him die? When the evidence is to the contrary. So, I think it's both ways, and I think we have to wait. And generally, I think the standards of care have to be adapted to a given region based on their resource capacities and also how their population respond to treatment. So I don't think it's set in stone. It's a very dynamic process which will keep evolving, and one has to be kind of aware how it works. So I'm sure even in India, as time goes on, we may find populations where it may work, populations which can't, and then we say, okay, this is where it is. So I think that's a process of evolution. Ethics is, in my opinion, a dynamic phenomena, and standards of care have to be, titrated to the given population and region.
Thank you, Dr. Ramji. There's a question from Dr. Arun Kumar. Could the less efficacious effects of therapeutic hypothermia be due to resuscitation with higher concentration of oxygen in the labor room? And another question, that the NNF criteria doesn't mention SGA or birth weight as inclusion criteria for selection. Should it be used in our setting?
Yeah, very important questions. I mean, clearly, if you give more oxygen, in 100% oxygen, it is going to affect the neuroprotection. A lot of studies are going on. I don't think we collected that information in the Helix trial, though. Yeah, I need to go back and check the practices. I don't think people are using 100% ox. I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, and yes, the growth restriction. I think that'll be good to have as a cutoff. Yeah.
And And is it intrauterine intermittent hypoxia or antenatal infections, micronutrient deficiency? That I think Dr. Ramji already answered. And there's a question from Dr. Shalini Tripathi. Please tell the deaths which occurred in Helix trial, were they same in moderate and severe HIE or more in the severe group?
More in severe, always more in severe. Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, definitely both in this one on prevent study, I think 70-80% mortality in the severe and maybe 30 or something in the moderate. Yeah.
Gauri, before you read the next question, we can just ask Dr. Sangeeta from Malaysia, what is their stand there? Dr. Sangeeta is from Malaysia, and then back to you, Gauri.
Hi. Good evening. Thank you, Dr. Sudhin, for the excellent talk. So in Malaysia, I would say that we are a middle income country. And similarly to India, we have hospitals who more equipped. There's a neurologist, there's a neuromonitoring, there are neonatologists, adequate care. So these hospitals, the babies who graduate from this hospital tend to come out better. But we do have a part of Malaysia where it's a bit more rural. And exactly like what Dr. Ramji said, we find that even if we cool these babies, of course, we've not published this data, but this is from the neonatologists who are working in these rural areas. These babies either don't seem to make it to the hospital or are not stable enough to undergo cooling therapy. So that's our experience in Malaysia. But similarly, like what Prof. Lakshmi said, we also cool babies who are moderate to severe HIE. That's our standard of care for caring for babies with HIE. Dr. Sudhir, I just have one very interesting thing to ask you, because I think what caught my eye was and my ears is we traditionally know HIE, the pathophysiology as being either acute disruption of cerebral blood flow or maybe versus sort of like chronic blood flow issues. But here you mentioned about intermittent hypoxia, intermittent issues with blood flow, and probably related to genetics. We are also been taught that there are certain MRI patterns which are linked to this pathophysiology. I'm wondering whether did you see, because sometimes we wonder which are the infants which may have this kind of features. So clinically, is there something which you can tell us, which you learned from the MRI studies or anything from neuromonitoring to suggest that the pathophysiology of HIE is this intermittent hypoxia?
Yeah, certainly from MRI you can say, but it's too late to do any treatment. You can see the chronic patterns in the MRI, but then what can you do? By that time you lost the, you can't do MRI.
So the pattern would be the same like in the chronic blood loss pattern? Is it the same?
Yeah, because MRI you cannot time within hours. MRI you can time only within, the most in days. And that's how, this is still a hypothesis. We don't have, there's a very small study we done on gene expression. We need to do larger before we can, definitely show this is intermittent hypoxia. But that's the preliminary data, that's what it's showing. Now, the issue is why is it occurring, the intermittent hypoxia? And the reason why we could think of, if you're already compromised in the womb, baby's already not that well, just the labor contractions is causing that intermittent hypoxia. And if we give excess oxytocin, that's worsening things. But again, it's all very much hypothesis at this stage.
So then I had one suggestion. Can early seizures be a clue for a intrauterine hypoxia rather than a sentinel event? So if somebody comes in with birth asphyxia and has already had seizures, he's likely to do badly with therapeutic hypothermia than one who's not had seizures. Is that a clinical marker, would you say?
In theory, that is possible. And when we did the EEG studies, it's occurring very early. So theoretically, you can say it's happened. It may not work. But then, even in the NICHT cooling trial, more in the TOBI trial, almost 60-70% did have seizures within 6 hours of birth, and still cooling worked. So it may be a contributing factor for sure. But on its own, I don't know.
May I ask something?
Yeah,
Please.
In your PREVENT trial, like you said you did very early EEGs. Did that show acute abnormalities in the background, suggesting more, during labor, or did it show disorganized, dysmature background, suggesting it was intermittent through pregnancy?
That I don't know. I mean, we had an EEG person called Ronit Pressler. I don't know if you know Ronit. She was reporting that. I don't know. Can you identify that kind of patterns? We could see early seizure onset, but other patterns of chronic and acute on EEG. You're on mute.
Lakshmi, you'll
You're
have
mute.
to unmute yourself.
I said, thank you. I said there are EG patterns that tell you if you have, whether it's the amplitude that's reduced or whether it's disorganized or dysmature, which tells you if it is acute injury or it is more chronic or subacute injury.
I need to go
Yes,
and
I
ask.
do know Ronnie quite well. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'll ask her. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. That'll be very interesting to look at. Yeah.
Gauri, can
Yeah,
I?
would
Actually,
be very
she's
interesting.
coming next week. No, she's coming next week for the talk. So Lakshmi, you please join in. Sudhin, you also join in. She has a talk next week. So,
Oh, don't. Okay.
so you
Can
can
ask her.
join and we can ask this question directly.
That
Dr.
might be
can
a
I
clue,
ask
Prof.
one?
Lakshmi, to what I asked actually. Your question.
Yeah.
There will be a clue to what was my question earlier also, whether there was any EEG changes.
Yeah, Vinayan wanted to say
Yeah.
something.
Yeah,
Vinayan, you were saying something.
no. So I just wanted to ask Sudhin. You have the centers across different South Asian hospitals, no? So is there a change? Is there a difference across the different localities, local hospitals regarding this? Because even in we work in Kerala with it's 100% booked pregnancies and neonatal mortality rate or infant mortality rate single digit. So even there, we see we were seeing this MRI of white matter injury much more than before. We had identified it much before because our pattern was a little different. So is it, our hospital is a little what you call in your pyramid, it goes into that top of the pyramid. So even then, we are seeing that kind of an injury much more than that. So is it something specific across the across all the localities, or it's something across different centers there is a difference?
Okay, that's interesting you say that. I didn't expect, from AIMS, Cochin, you would see that kind of appearance. I hadn't worked in those kind of hospitals. Most of our hospitals has been like the tertiary medical colleges, where it's really the lower end of the spectrum you're seeing, the low socioeconomic. So I don't have any data from the higher.
No, but even in a higher socioeconomic centers like us, our birth weight is much lower than the West. So
Sure.
So that is much than our body weight of the mothers are much less than the West. So is there anything, so many other factors which is contributing to this injury? It's just a hypothesis I'm asking because I'm not seeing that kind of a difference. So this white matter injury is very common in our state.
It'll be very interesting to look at because I would have thought, Kerala's health status is generally better, isn't it? It'll be a bit more like the upper middle income, or, if you're seeing a lot of white matter injury, it'll be really good to look at why is it happening. And
No, actually, it's there is. I think you must understand that we have data to show that even women in Kerala, micronutrient deficiency is very high. So even though they don't have overt disease, but we know that a large part of population, even those who belong to better social strata, have significant micronutrient deficiencies. And so I think there is much more to be looked at than just
even anemia, sir. There are a lot of iron deficiency in a higher setting.
So we know that anemia in India is not just iron and folic acid. We know it's complex. So that's one of the reasons why we have a huge challenge about eliminating anemia in this country. And I think to this extent, I think we need to understand. And there was there has been an ICMR mapping some years ago for all the micronutrient status across India, which shows that there is hardly any state or hardly any socioeconomic strata that is not affected by it. So I think there is more to it than what we see, and that has something to do with the region, or dietary patterns, cropping, and things of that kind, which goes beyond just health sciences. I think it's a challenge that we need to seriously look into, and I think till we address them, we will still continue to see some of these problems, even though we provide many of our women reasonably good health care, and they don't have overt disease, but I think there's something hidden which we don't see.
Thank you, sir. That is a
Gauri, there's a question from Taj.
Yeah, there's a question from Dr. Taj. Dr. Sudhin, would you comment on the yet to be known or little known genetic susceptibility of newborns to HI and its impact on therapeutic hypothermia outcomes?
We have done whole genome sequence. We have not analyzed the data yet. On epigenetics, we collected whole genome, we have sequenced. We have not analyzed it yet, but I just can't think why should there be a genetic reason for cooling. It should be on either epigenetics or some nutritional kind of thing. Genetically, why should there be? At least I can't think of any reason.
May I comment?
Yes, please. Yeah.
If there's a small study which looked at babies who have acute symptomatic seizures and then had post-neonatal epilepsy much later. And the number of on an epilepsy panel, the number of variants that were seen in those who developed long-term epilepsy was much more than in those who had acute symptomatic seizures and didn't develop long-term epilepsy. So I think there has to be a genetic component to it as well.
Okay.
Dr.
most
Mahesh
of the-
wanted to comment. Sorry.
And I'm just saying, in most of the things, the host factors are there, and genetics is playing a very big role. And what you're saying, so then epigenetics is where most therapeutic intervention targets would be for most of the cases, because that will be the modifiable thing which is going to express that is there, like there. So I think it is going to be there. I know request was there. We have actually short time. I'm sorry, but we have 2 cases because the cases are being kept because of interest by residents across India. So we have 2 presenters and they are requested to stick to time for 6+2. So I request you guys to please stay on for another 20 minutes or so and listen to the cases and give comments. And meanwhile, Sudhin, can you just type any of the can you go to the Q&A? If anything left unanswered, can you type it so as to involve, the young people, but you please listen to, because see, HI and hypothermia, you can, even while sleeping, you can write the same thing, but you listen to them, so they give them input. I will request all the experts to stay on. And Gauri, we'll have to ask them to stick to time, not less than 6. We have given 6+2, 6 minutes for presentation to discussion. And can we have the first one? Gauri, will you call them, please?
Yeah. The first speaker is Dr. Nikita Rafiq, and the moderator is Dr. Vaishak Anand from AIMS Kochi. Dr. Nikita.
Nikita, earnest request 6+2.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Am I audible?
You're
Hello?
good.
Okay.
Good.
Okay.
Make it full screen, but
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you
Perfect.
opened that video also.
Sorry. Okay. Good evening to one and all. I'm Dr. Nikita Rafiq, Fellow in Pediatric Neurology at Amrita Institute of Medical Sciences, Cochin. My moderator is Dr. Vaishak Anand sir, and my guide is Dr. Vinay sir. So this is a case presentation titled Brain on Fire and Brimstones in P. This is a case of a 12 days old baby girl, second born of non-consanguineous marriage from Kerala, who presented to us with paroxysmal events, lethargy and poor activity from day 3 of life. The birth history, she had an uneventful antenatal period. The baby was outborn, term delivered by normal vaginal delivery, and cried immediately after birth, with a birth weight of 3.2 kilos and a head circumference of 34 centimeters. The baby developed respiratory distress within 2 hours of life and was shifted to NICU, received oxygen via nasal prongs. On day 3 of life, the baby was noted to have abnormal posturing and a high-pitched cry. And from day 3 to day 6, child had recurrent seizures and had to receive injection phenobarbital, Levipil, followed by fosphenytoin. Also, encephalopathy was noted. Baby was lethargic with poor activity and feeding difficulties. However, no seizures were noted after day 7 of life. But because of persistent encephalopathy, the child was referred to our side on day 12 of life and was on Levipil. There's a family history of sudden sibling death on day 7 of life with an unknown cause. At admission, on examination, the child was noted to be irritable with excessive jitteriness. Anthropometric measures were normal. AF was level with and was pulsatile. No facial dysmorphism was noted. Skin and hair was normal. Neurological examination showed axial hypotonia with appendicular hypertonia, was moving all 4 limbs, reflexes were preserved with poor morose, and other systemic examination was normal. The investigations revealed normal blood routines. GLAC, glucose, ammonia, lactate, urine ketones, and blood gas was normal. Sepsis screen was negative, and CSF study, which was done outside, was normal. A bedside EEG showed multifocal discharges with excessive discontinuity. 2D echo was normal. Ophthalmological examination was also normal, and we sent the TMS GCMS. The outside MRI report was reported as a restricted diffusion in bilateral frontotemporoparietal occipital cortex, thalamus, insula, and splenium of corpus callosum, with features suggestive of HIE and PVL changes in the white matter. So we reviewed the MRI films, and here we see the axial T2 weighted images with encephalomalacia changes with regions of CSF isointensity in bilateral gangliocapsular region. Prominent CSF spaces are noted in the interhemispheric fissure and subarachnoid spaces, suggesting cerebral atrophy. And the diffusion weighted images, it's not clear, but it showed diffusion restriction in bilateral frontal, temporoparietal, and occipital region, insula, and the corpus callosum. The sagittal sections shows a prominence of the basal systems and CSF spaces retrocerebellar, suggestive of cerebellar atrophy, and also thin corpus callosum. So on this clinical background, a metabolic etiology was considered more likely than a hypoxic event because no sentinel event was present at birth, and there is a history of sibling death. There is refractory seizures with encephalopathy and significant MRI changes, despite any significant birth history. However, non-consanguineous parentage and normal metabolic parameters are points against it. So the most likely differential considered for an IEM-like for an HIE-like presentation was molybdenum cofactor deficiency and isolated sulfate oxidase deficiency. Pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy also was considered because of the refractory seizures and encephalopathy, but MRI changes was not very suggested. Other differentials considered was in utero hypoxia. So the baby was continued on Levipil and pyridoxine was added. Because of these differentials, we sent serum uric acid, which was very low, 0.1 mg per dl, and urine sulfides were sent, and whole exome sequencing was done. So the urine GCMS report came as increased excretion of xanthin, and which was interpreted as can be seen as a case of xanthinuria or hypoxia, but it was not very suggestive. The urine sulfite levels was positive. It was increased with 60 mg per liter, and the whole exome came out as a compound heterozygous mutation in the MOCS2 gene in exon 3 and 2, which is a likely pathogenic variant suggesting molybdenum cofactor deficiency B with an autosomal recessive inheritance. So no seizures were noted in further hospital stay. The general condition improved. Baby started taking direct breastfeeds and was discharged after 9 days of admission. And at follow-up at 5 months of age, the baby was noted to have developmental delay, no seizures, so Levipil was discontinued. Coming on to the molybdenum cofactor deficiency, it is an autosomal recessive inborn error of metabolism, which was first described in 1978 with an incidence of 1 in 1 to 2 lakhs. 100 patients have been so far identified. Typically, the baby is normal at birth, develops intractable seizures and encephalopathy within hours to weeks. A normal head circumference is noted at birth and later acquires microcephaly. The molybdenum cofactor deficiency results in a deficiency of other enzymes like sulfite oxidase, xanthin dehydrogenase, and aldehyde oxidase. The accumulation of metabolites, toxic metabolites like sulfite, taurine, S-sulfocysteine, and thiosulfate are noted. Now, the synthesis of molybdenum cofactor from GTP, guanine triphosphate, requires the activity of 4 genes, namely the MOCS1, 2, 3, and the GPHN, respectively causing the type A, B, and C as depicted. So this is required for the synthesis of molybdenum cofactor. The molybdenum cofactor is in turn required for the conversion of sulfite to sulfate and also from hypoxanthin and xanthin to uric acid. So in the case of isolated sulfite oxidase deficiency, we only see that there is a decrease in the sulfate and increase in sulfite with concurrent increase in S-sulfocysteine and thiosulfates. Also, there is an increased conversion of homocysteine and cysteine to taurine. So there is an increase in taurine and decrease in the cysteine and homocysteine levels. In molybdenum cofactor deficiency, along with this, we also get the second pathway which is affected, which is the xanthin and hypoxanthin conversion to uric acid. So uric acid is not being formed. There is a decrease in uric acid and there is an increase in hypoxanthin and xanthin. Because of the deficiency of xanthine dehydrogenase, renal stones are found, which is a feature in the molybdenum cofactor deficiency pathway. The clinical characteristics include the early onset. Sir, ma'am?
Time is over, ma'am. 6 minutes is done.
Okay. I will just go through fast. So it can present with encephalopathy, seizures, feeding difficulties, appendicular hypotonia, axial hypotonia, the red of which were seen in our baby. And in late onset mild MOCD, it causes acute neurological decompensation and setting of infection with altered mental status, dystonia, ataxia, fluctuating hypotonia and hypertonia. An important slide is that how to differentiate from HIE is one is the lack of sentinel event in the perinatal period, and radiologically there will be brain degeneration present at the time of birth, like atrophy and cystic leukomalacia, presence of megacystoma magna, hypoplastic CC. Caudate is rarely affected in HIE, but is always characteristically present in molybdenum cofactor deficiency, and also diffusion restriction persists during the chronic phase of MOCD, but in HIE there is pseudo-normalization by day 7. And choline peak is seen in MRS, which is reduced in HIE and elevated in molybdenum cofactor. So there is another important point is the targeted therapy for the molybdenum cofactor type A, which is for fosdenopterin, nalibride. It actually restores the pathway by providing the MOSC1, that is CPMP, which is a synthetic form, and thus the other factors are formed. And all the other subtypes can use a cysteine restricted diet, which will decrease the oxidative cysteine catabolism and downstream sulfide production. So take home message is normal initiation of metabolic parameters. Do not rule out IEMs. Keep a high index of suspicion for conditions that mimic HIE when clinical history does not align with significant MRI findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nikita.
Yes, ma'am.
This child had low uric acid, so it was unlikely to be sulfite oxidase. It would go more in favor of molybdenum.
Yes, ma'am.
Any comments from the experts? It was a very nice case. Yeah, Dr. Hassan.
Thank you. It is very nice. It is very nice case, and also it is a typical diagnostic challenge between the inborn error of metabolism and hypoxic ischemic brain injury. Thank you. Excellent presentation. My question about: did you check the MRI studies with magnetic resonance spectroscopy or MRI after the treatment therapy? Because you get a, Nikita, very great response for the treatment, the drug targeted therapy. Did you check the MRI evaluation and MRS examination?
So this child had the MOSC type B, not A. So the treatment could not be possible for this child. And the child had already, yes.
Yeah, I see that.
Vaishak, want to add something? Vaishak?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. So this kid actually was referred as a case of HAE, but from the starting itself, it was clear that radiologically as well as clinically, it was not fitting into the typical HAE that we see day-to-day life. And it was the MRI picture actually, in fact, struck us that it could be molybdenum cofactor deficiency because there was so much cystic changes and different restriction at day 12, and the sentinel level was not fitting with that picture. And that's why we checked the uric acid. It was low, which otherwise would have been overlooked, such a non-specific finding. And TMS seasons also was non-specific. In fact, there was nothing to suggest apart from this MRI finding and the family history of a sibling death to suggest an IEM. So another take-home message is that even when we are suspecting an IEM, if our bedside test, initial bedside test like glucose, lactate, and even TMS seasons are normal, that doesn't rule out some IEMs, like one is the molybdenum cofactor, other cases like pyridoxine-dependent epilepsy, sulfite oxidase, NKH. These all can have normal bedside metabolic parameters initially. So that. And regarding the MRIs, actually this kid had an MRI from outside, and we didn't repeat an MRI from our center because already the picture was clear. So, and the child was not stable enough to shift for an MRI specifically. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we move on to the next case? Dr. Abhishek Pandey from PGI Chandigarh will be presenting, and the moderator is Dr. Arushi Seni.
Good evening, ma'am.
Yes, we can hear. You can share your screen.
Are my slides visible, ma'am?
No.
Hello.
I have shared my screen.
You have to click first the share screen button.
I have shared once. Share. Are my slides visible, ma'am?
Yeah, now it's visible. Put it on slideshow mode, sir.
Right. So I'll be fast. We present a rare case of neonatal encephalopathy, almost similar to the previous case. So this baby was actually admitted in hospital because this baby had two previous sibling deaths. So there was a high index of suspicion. It was a consanguineous marriage. So the baby was born in hospital, and the baby had on day 2 had seizures, poor suck, and axial hypotonia. It was a term baby, 3.5 kg male. The parameters anthropometry were normal. Baby had subtle dysmorphism in the form of deep set eyes, thin eyebrows, and long philtrum. It was a consanguineous marriage. The first, and there were 2 sibling deaths. First sib was a male, full term, no asphyxia. However, in 24 hours had poor feeding and lethargy and died at 36 hours on way to hospital. And second sib was a female, near term, no asphyxia. However, encephalopathy and tachypnea on day 14 with an NCCT head which showed cerebellar hypoplasia, and basic IM workup was negative, and the baby expired on day 42 of life. And there were also previous neonatal deaths in the previous families. So it was a consanguineous marriage. It was suggestive of an autosomal recessive disorder. And we had a plan of management of early onset rapid encephalopathy to rule out the following disorders like organic acidemias, urea cycle defects, and other amino acidopathies. So we kept the baby nil per orally and IV dextrose until the baby was diagnosed. So this is a standard approach. We do ammonia, blood pH, carbon dioxide, look for acidosis and ketosis. The baby's basic parameters are absolutely actually normal. At 36 hours, the baby had seizures loaded with IV phenobarb. At 48 hours, baby had multifocal clonic seizures and encephalopathy, and empirical cocktail, mitochondrial cocktail was started. And parameters were repeated again, which were again negative. We did an MRI on day 4 of life. The T2 weighted MRI shows hyperintensities in bilateral cerebral white matter, and there was very evident cerebellar hypoplasia, similarly seen in the previous sibling. And we had diffusion weighted images showed mild cortical diffusion restriction. So at this stage, we narrowed down to a possibility of an autosomal recessive disorder, which was substrate independent, which had a normal ammonia and CBC, predominantly CNS symptoms with rapid onset encephalopathy and seizures, cerebellar hypoplasia, and had, and I forgot to mention, MRS showed lactate peaks. So possibilities considered at this stage was non-ketotic hyperglycemia, biotinidase deficiency, sulfite oxidase, molybdenum cofactor, mitochondrial encephalopathy were all considered. Subtle dysmorphic features were there. However, there was no skin rashes were present. Again, we repeated few parameters. Blood biotinidase days was normal, TMS was normal, and ultrasound abdomen was done, which was negative. In view of persistent encephalopathy, an ultrasound was repeated, and we repeated an MRI on day 24 of life, which showed extensive white matter encephalomyelitis changes in the cerebral hemispheres. So it made a possibility of molybdenum cofactor versus sulfite oxidase as a possibility. MRI showed cerebellar hypoplasia, which usually starts with edema and progresses on to develop cysts. So we sent a urinary sulfite. Urinary sulfite is usually should be sent immediately on ice and tested immediately. The sulfites were strongly positive. Homocysteine was low. It was only 2, and uric acid was 3. So, and we also sent genetic tests, which came to be positive for sulfite oxidase mutation, SUX gene. So just a 1 minute on clinical summary of sulfite oxidase deficiency. It usually starts on first 2 days of life in 50% cases. There is abnormal muscle tone, hypotonia, initially developmental delay, seizures, ectopial entries is found, and urinary sulfites are positive in almost 95% of cases. The pathophysiology has been described in detail by the previous speaker. So I'll just mention that the amino acids cause seizures, and reduced myelin causes, cerebellar hypoplasia. And the cause of low homocysteine and low uric acid and molybdenum we already know from the previous speaker. The baby was started on mother's milk, and thiamine supplementation was given. Baby was discharged on day 42 with a good genetic counseling for the parents. They are of risk of recurrence in the future pregnancies. Further, the baby was followed up and the baby required admissions once or twice in the hospital. The baby was on anti-seizure medications. However, despite continued therapy, the baby expired at the age of 1 year. The parents were counseled again about the risk of recurrence in the future pregnancy and the benefit of antenatal screening. I acknowledge the parents and the entire neonatology, neuroradiology, genetics, and biochemistry team to help in the management of this neonate. Thank you. I run fast because.
Thank you, Dr. Abhishek. Excellent presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
One clue on the MRI always for these disorders are a cortical ribbon of diffusion restriction. That's even before the cysts come up.
Right, ma'am.
Any question? Any comments from the experts? Anybody else?
Dr. Arushi is in a location where I think the network is a little unstable. So she was here, but presently I'm unable to.
I think this case again highlights the enrollment of cases for therapeutic hypothermia. Besides weight, gestation, as I already told, complications just before starting hypothermia, some of them could be having already in metabolism. There are so many variable confounders that needs to be taken care of in selecting cases for therapeutic hypothermia. I think so. The student probably.
Thank you. Actually, I will now request everybody for a take-home message, and last message will be from Sudhin because he's the chief speaker. So, Dr. Talukdar, your take-home message, and then all the experts, then the moderator, and finally our speaker. Take-home message for the attendees. Dr. Talukdar, sir, any take-home message for the attendees over the whole session?
Yeah, the therapeutic hypothermia really still, as Ramji had said, is a observation. It is still under trial and control. Still a trial. We should not probably. We are yet to take it as a rational therapy or is a accepted modality of therapy. It will take some time, I think.
Thank you, sir. Ramji, sir. Professor Ramji, sir.
I think the message is clear that there are plenty of mimics to HIE. So all neonatal encephalopathies are not identical, and I think we need to be aware of that. And I think we should, therefore, there is a need for having fairly stringent criteria to decide who fits into HIE, and a whole bunch of them who is yes, like what you shared just now. Increasingly, I think with access to more diagnostics and genetic workup, we realize that there's something beyond that. So I think one has to be cautious, and every little clue, I think these are very good clues that you had in both the latter cases, which will tell you why it's not HIE, and we need to look beyond that.
And another thing to keep in mind, sometimes like we always keep attributing that HI was there. HI can be in the path. It may not be it may be in the path of something which is there. So it may not be the ultimately cause for it. So it has to be kept in mind that anybody else in fetus would have been, which has now become a neonate has been predisposed due to some intrinsic thing in the host itself, in the neonate. So that has to be kept in mind. Professor Hassan? Professor Hassan? Dr. Lakshmi? Dr. Lakshmi?
Thank you. Just always illustrates clinical cases are fascinating always. And as you rightly pointed out, HIE can overlap with metabolic disorders and genetic disorders. You can have both, and you should always keep that in mind. But it is both the cases were very good and very well presented. Thank you. And the other thing with the therapeutic hypothermia, it's a salutary lesson to learn that we shouldn't take things for granted. It's always useful to rethink and relook at things, because there might be more things to learn for therapeutic options that we take for granted. Thank
Dr.
you.
Hassan, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Dr. Hassan?
Thank you, Chef Ali. I think all the messages are clear. I am happy to be involved in this session. I explained that we need restricted criteria for the therapeutic hypothermia, and also we need new neurophysiological biogenic markers to evaluate the HIV cases. Thank you very much.
Dr. Sangeeta?
I echo with everyone also. A very nice session. Thank you for having me. I want to thank Dr. Sudhin especially for making us rethink about feasibility and suitability of therapeutic hypothermia in certain susceptible groups of babies. Thank you.
Dr. Gauri?
I think we should learn from Sudhin to
No,
be
he'll
courageous.
say in the end. That will be the final message. He's
Yeah.
thinking. You say, no, he's going to be becoming difficult for him now. So it'll be left with something. He has to say what he can't repeat what anybody
I'm
else
not
has said.
saying anything about hypothermia or about HIV. I'm saying we need to learn to be idealistic and to be courageous. That's it.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Mahesh, a secretary of AOCN, and then comes Sudhin, because Sudhin should get, it has to be different from what anybody has said. Mahesh?
Ma'am, it was really a very nice talk, ma'am. And even the both the cases very, very nice, ma'am. So I'm just waiting for Sudhin's final comment, ma'am. Thank you.
Yeah. Sudhin, back to you.
Back to me. Well, I got two messages. One is about the thing about I remember about Gauri. After all so many years, always stand up for your colleagues, protect your younger colleagues. And I remember the ways she used to shield us from Meban Singh and all those. When he had his goals, it's just so important to have that collegiate. And second is for the young generation. It's so important to do research. When you read Nelson's version 24 to 25, the change that happens is because of the research you do. So trust your eyes and don't take the things written in textbooks as a Bible. You need to make the change.
Thank you so much, Sudhin. It was such a pleasure to have you and the whole group. I mean, it was amazing, and Gauri has been my favorite senior anyway, so that's fine. And somebody I told you the most cerebral couple they were, and so that is there. Thank you everyone for joining. Really grateful to you. And Mahesh, you can close it and call for the next session.
Yes, sir. The details of the next session will be mailed and sent on WhatsApp. We'll update you the final program by next Monday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Thank
night.
you. And you
Good
can join because it'll be Ronit will be there. So Lakshmi can ask directly now. Sudhin will be there. That's good.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Bye-bye.
So then you will be traveling that day, but you can anyway log in on the panelist link will be sent. And when Ronit is there, that can be in case. I know you'll be on travel, but log in on the mobile.
Bangladesh. She's gone to Bangladesh.
No, next week she'll be there. 8 to 9:30 p.m. IST. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Lakshmi. Thank you so much. It's so late night for you. And even for Dr. Sangeeta, it's late night. You're ahead in time. Thank you so much. Thank you,
Right.
everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. 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 Bye.
Thank you.